last month, I was sitting right over there, and Martha said I was going to share tonight, and I said, I'm going to talk about my dad. The last few times I've told stories, I've talked about my mother. My mother was a very colorful person, and it was easy to tell stories about her. But when I started to think about, oh man, I really just spouted out about Dad, what am I going to say about him? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized my dad, you can't tell a story about my dad without talking about alcohol. And so this is kind of a story about alcohol and lost opportunity. Let's see. When I was a child, I absolutely adored my father. I was the third born, and he just enjoyed everything about being a dad. And he loved to help me with my physicality. I was very much a person that needed to move. I still am. And I enjoyed gymnastics, and he helped me with that. He helped me to stand on my hands until I could walk on my hands. I could walk 100 steps on my hands when I was a kid. And my dad was a lot of the reason why. I remember one time, we lived in North Portland. I grew up in Portland. And we lived near Peninsula Park. And we were at the park together, my dad and I. I was probably 9, 10 years old. And they had a chin-up bar. And I was trying to do that pull over, I think it's called. And I practiced and practiced and was so frustrated. And my dad just started laughing at me. He said, Franny, it took me weeks to learn to do that. You're going to have it down today. And I did. And I never forgot that encouragement from my dad. He just was, he was my hero. And we would play, he loved to sit down and play games with us around the table. And he would, from the time I can't even remember learning how to play cribbage, because I was playing from such a young age, he would have to tell me how to discard, how many points I was getting for each move, and he just delighted in our confusion when we won. But he helped us every step of the way, and those memories are just really precious to me. So when I was about 12, the family decided to move to the country. And we had, my parents, all the time I was growing up, they were super involved in the anti-communist, frenzy of the U.S. And they decided to move to the country so it'd be safer when the communists tried to take over. And we moved on to these 6 acres in Corbett, and it was a whole change. My dad now was very, he'd get home late because he was still working in town, and he was working on the property, and we kind of started to distance, and I was getting to that age where I'm going through a lot of changes. So my mother, who now is away from her neighborhood and Catholic group of people, doesn't have the support she had before. I think that was one of the reasons why my dad's drinking became such an issue for her. And I hadn't really realized my dad was drinking much when I was in town. But they started having financial trouble, and Mom told us kids, she said, if your dad would quit drinking, then I wouldn't have to go to work. And so he didn't stop drinking, and she got a job. She was a dietitian, but she hadn't worked all the years we were growing up, and till then. And she went to work at Edgefield Manor. It used to be an old folks home, and that's where she went to work. And she worked there until about 1971, I think, and it closed in 1972. So she was right up there until the end of its existence. But the financial problems kind of went away at that point. And I was having a lot of success in school. I was in junior high and then 9th grade, and I had a lot of achievement in sports, and I won this award that used to be given in Corbett at the 8th grade for the best athlete, best scholar by the teachers, they decided. And I won that. But I also, at the same time, was becoming very interested in boys. And my mother was completely freaked out about that. And she just, my older sister hadn't been that way, but I was, I always had a boyfriend, and I actually, the summer after, I think it was 8th grade, no, it wasn't, it was my freshman year. Anyway, when I went to freshman year, I started dating a boy that had the worst reputation in the high school. I even had other friends that were boys that told me, if you keep going dating him, I can't be your friend anymore. And, but I was bound and determined. So my mother told me, she said, if you don't break up with him, you're gonna have to go to St. Mary's Academy in downtown Portland. And so I said, okay, send me. So what that meant, and it's been about 4 years now since my dad has really been a major figure in my life. But he still worked in town, and he worked close to downtown. He worked right by Broadway Bridge. And so he became my transportation to school and back. He'd drop me off at St. Mary's, and then after school I'd ride the bus, and a couple hours he'd get off work and he'd take me home. So every day my dad and I had an hour and 15 minutes together in the car, there and back. Not each way, but all together. And it was an opportunity. And my dad had a huge effect on me. And it was his opportunity to reinvest in my life. And instead, the two of us rode back and forth every day in complete silence. He did not engage me in conversation, and I was the youngster, and I actually already had the expectation that he would reach out to me, and he didn't do it. One day, I made friends at St. Mary's, and I had a girlfriend who invited me to spend the night. And I spent the night at her house on a Sunday night, and then would go home with my dad that night after school on Monday. So Sunday night, my friend told me that she was in love with me, and that she was a lesbian. And I hadn't known that, and I had never known a lesbian before, and I completely freaked out. I'm sure I hurt her feelings. I don't remember what I said, but mostly I was just confused, and I didn't know how to be her friend and not be what she wanted me to be. I was a very codependent kid, so I'm sure it was like, I can't be what you need, And so we made it through the night, and I went, and we stayed friends, but it definitely affected how close we were. And so Monday night, I'm riding home with my dad, and just the enormity of the situation really hit me, and I just wept all the way home, told my dad what had happened and how upset I was and how I didn't know how to be your friend now and all of these things. And I can't remember my father saying anything. He just grabbed that steering wheel and was headed home. And I know it was that trip home where I am so needy and my dad is not open, that I thought, the only thing you care about is that drink you're going to get the minute you get home. And the anger just built in me. And sure enough, when we got home, he did what he always did, was take his bottle of vodka out of the cupboard. It was always in the paper bag. Pour a shot, down a glass of water. And then 30 minutes later, 45 minutes later, he'd do it again. So he took it like medicine. He didn't even seem to enjoy it. So our trips back and forth with my dad in silence and me in silence continued. And the next event that I remember where my dad had a huge opportunity was my junior year, I was going with a boy that went to where did he go to school? He went to Jesuit, excuse me. Anyway, we would talk. I would ride the bus to my dad's work, and there was a phone booth by the Coliseum there, and I would go to that phone booth and my boyfriend would call me. And so we'd talk on the phone until my dad got off work. Well, this one day, for some reason, I was indoors, and I can't remember why, but I was in his office, and his workspace was about the size of this restaurant, and everybody had their desks kind of scattered around, and it was but there was no cubicles or anything. And I was up front at an empty desk, and I got on the phone with my boyfriend, and he broke up with me. And I tried real hard not to make a spectacle of myself, but I was really brokenhearted. And I cried in front of the whole office. And my dad didn't come up or anything. He took me home and he didn't say anything. He took me all the way home. So my senior year, my mom had to get a new job. It was before my senior year, so, at the end of my junior year. She had to get a new job because of Edgefield closing. So she found a job over in Vancouver at Evergreen High School, or the school district. And she didn't think it would really look right if I didn't go to school over there too. So I was ready to change schools. I was okay with it. So my senior year, I didn't ride with my dad. But by that time, I was a cigarette smoker. And my dad I don't think he thought about it one way or the other, but we kind of reconnected over cigarettes. And because I didn't have any income, he bought me my cigarettes. So my senior year, we kind of started making a little bit of progress, but then I moved out, got married, and it's only now that I'm interested in genealogy and family that I have really started to get to know my dad and who he was before alcoholism really altered who he was. And he was a very, very sweet person. And that's my story. And I have found it really hard to prepare because every time I have, I've gotten so sad. So I apologize for my ums and whatever. So thank you very much for listening.